Well, welcome to my analysis of Game of the Day from Bilbao, and this is a great game. Now, what does a real champion do after a loss in a competition, a very painful loss? He bounces back with fire in his belly, and that's precisely what Magnus Carlsen does here with the black pieces, and again, he shows us in this game why he's a great champion. Now, he has black here against a talented player from China, Wei Yi. A lot of people have tipped Wei Yi to be the first ever Chinese world champion, and I think he's an exceptional talent. He's only 17 years old. He became a grandmaster when most of us are still trying to get through school at the age of 13. And he's a very good player, and we're going to see a lot of his talent in this game as well. Now, the game starts off with Magnus picking one of the most, should we say, aggressive systems you can play against 1e4, the so-called Tiger modern variation. And this is a variation in the perk opening where you aim to strike against white centre from the side. So you're aiming to strike from the side. And this little move a6 was popularised by the Swedish player Tiger Persson, a very, very interesting player, and he really came up with this opening of going b5 and made it popular with a number of books that he wrote. Now, both sides develop with standard play. Now, white picks this aggressive way of putting 3 pawns in the centre. Black continues by attacking from the side, and also black needs to develop his pieces. Now, this is an interesting move, e5, trying to blast through the centre. Black plays a very calm bishop b7. Now bishop d3 was played by Wei Yi, completing more development. A move that the more maverick players out there of you might consider if you ever get to this position would be something like e6. This move is aiming to really put a spanner in the works here and confuse black's development. Because after black really has to take this pawn, you can try knight g5, and now black must play a move like knight to f8, and black's pieces are really looking extremely ugly in this position. And I have to say, to play this opening as black, you have to be incredibly brave. I mean, especially at this level, but at any level, because there is the danger with your lack of space that you could just get completely blown away here. But we are dealing with Magnus Carlsen, and he rarely gets blown away. So now they follow a line which has been played before, and Magnus now plays c5, and this is one of the main ideas with Tiger's Modern. You have to attack the centre from the side, and you have to do these pawn breaks. White exchanges this strong bishop of Magnus's on e4, and now a good move, and this is a move that's become popular recently, knight to h6, again recommended by Tiger Persson. Black gets ready to castle, and black tries to move his pieces in on the light squares. Why does he do that? Because white's put his pawns on dark squares, it leaves his light squares weak. So now we have an exchange of pawns. White gets what seems to be a very dangerous c-pawn here. Look at this pawn. This pawn 2 squares from queening, but Magnus keeps this under control. An exchange of queens happens, and even though the queens have been exchanged off, this seems to be a very rich position full of chances of both sides. Because, of course, Magnus has the centre, but the c-pawn is very dangerous. Now, in the game, white played c7. I think that a good area to look at for improvements of white here would be a typical break, a typical pawn break here. Can you see the break? You see this idea being used in a number of positions similar to this. That is the move a4. This move is aiming to break into these pawns and open up the rook. I think that's a good improvement. But now let's go through the early stage of the middle game quite quickly. It gets very tactical, and Magnus brings his king to what he perceives as the safest square, c6, because at least now his rooks are connected, but he has to get rid of this pawn. White's rook comes flying down into d8. On the surface, this looks very dangerous to black, but again, Magnus just showing what a cool customer he is. He plays a great move, knight d6, a very powerful knight here. White exchanges and then brings his last piece into play. Knight c4, and the whole point of this is to try to dislodge the bishop so that black can aim to take the pawn on c7, the most dangerous pawn. And he is able to do that now with rook takes c7. But Wei Yi, a brilliant tactical, aggressive player, is now aiming to swap his compensation for an attack against the black king. At the moment, the d6 square is covered, so he plays b3, forcing the knight to move, and now there's two things he can do. He has d6, and he can also take the pawn on e5. So first he takes the pawn on e5. And again, very complicated, lots of exchanges going on here. Magnus takes on d1, temporarily winning the exchange, and now Wei Yi checks on d6. Now, he could have taken on c7, but after the sequence knight c3, and now let's say an exchange of rooks, well, black can play this intermezzo move, a move in the middle of a combination, and this picks up an extra pawn for Magnus. And one thing you do not want to be when you're playing Magnus Carlsen is a pawn down in an ending. You might as well just write dead on your gravestone and just end it there. It's not good. So instead, Wei Yi keeps the complications flowing. And let's move on to a later stage of the game after we have a bit of a flurry of tactics here. So black is an exchange up, but white's pieces are very active. So black has to part with some material very soon. Bishop e5, and this move wins back material because the rook is overloaded. So rook d8, really the only move. The rook was running out of squares. And now king to b2, a good move. There's a nasty trap here. If white tries to take on c7, well, in actual fact, he's going to get in a lot of trouble here with king takes c7. And now the white rook has to move. And we see a common checkmate pattern now emerge around the white king. And in chess, if you're trying to improve, you have to get used to these patterns. They become second nature then. Can you see the pattern? Rook d1 check, and now b4. And this is preparing to move rook b1, checkmate, end of the game. So, of course, Wei Yi saw this. He played king to b2. And the game continues. Let's get to another stage of the game. We're going to see now white is a pawn up here. So Wei Yi is a pawn up, but his rook is really out of place here. And here I think we see the spirit of this young Chinese player. He could have played a move now like rook to a5. And this was a calmer move, but he wanted to keep all of his pawns and play for the win with rook a3. A very brave decision. Magnus now plays excellently. Even though he's a pawn down, Magnus coordinates his remaining two pieces in the best way possible. c4 now played, after knight to e3. And here, Magnus takes on c4. And in this position, well, to keep equality, white could have played b4. So white makes his first error, knight to e5. And this is an error because now look how the black pieces fly into the position. And Magnus starts to get incredibly active. And more importantly, this c-pawn is very dangerous for white. First of all, we check the king, manoeuvring our knight away from the attack. And now this pawn becomes a real trump in the position. And here Magnus is indeed winning. But I would say only because Wei Yi's played in this very brave approach. Both players should be commended really for their extremely brave approach to the game. Now let's move on a bit further. We have a bit more dancing about here from both sides. A nice little tactic there, by the way, knight d6. And this is aiming for, if king takes d6, rook d2 check, gaining an important tempo. And then the c-pawn can march down and become a queen. So, of course, you cannot take that knight. And there was a very interesting moment coming up here. Even here, with correct play, white has some chances had he played a move like knight to b4. But young players, they are very, well, I think in general, very optimistic. As you get older, you start to get more doubts in life. And you start to doubt your strength. And you start to think maybe in a more, should we say, calmer manner. But here, white's still playing for the win. Rook a4. And now we move on. More dancing. Black is doing very well here. Now, an interesting moment arose because still white has great chances. And the next major moment of the game is here on move 48. And this was unbelievable. Because in this complicated position where black is 2 squares away from queening, White decided to play the move King c7. So after Rook b2, King c7 was the move played by Wei Yi. Now, after the game in the press conference, Wei Yi said that he realised he could play b4 here, gaining a draw. And in actual fact, with deep analysis, it seems that this move becomes very close to being a draw, because there's ideas of Rook c4 here, and, you know, these pawns are becoming very dangerous, very complicated, and it's a very in-depth line. But Wei Yi thought he could play for a win with the move King c7. Why King c7? Well, let's go back to this move b4. Now, after b4, Magnus can play knight to d6, and this controls the c4 square. So now Wei Yi would have to play a move like rook d3 to make sure his rook can become behind the passed pawn. And this is key when you're trying to deal with an opponent's passed pawn. Come behind that pawn. Instead, he played King c7 to stop this idea, still playing for a win at this moment, but he totally missed Magnus's next move, knight c5. And this now guarantees Magnus the point. So complicated knights to work out. But the real point of this, after rook c4, the rook becomes behind the pawn, knight a6 check, and now rook takes b3. This requires very deep calculation. King takes a6. Black has this clever move, king to d5. Unbelievable. Even though he's a piece down, the king now forks the rook and the knight. And there's no going back now for white. Okay, the rook moves, and now c2. And this is becoming a queen. After a couple of spite checks, well, we get to this ending here. And again, like I say, when you're playing Magnus in an ending where you're worse, you're going to lose. And we can see here that white is tied up. He has one hope left, the A pawn, but it's not going to go anywhere. There's too many threats with queen check, king takes b6. And Magnus, of course, rounds this game up very nicely. After a final couple of checks, and now he has his own pawn, and Freddy, the f-pawn, will now land. The eagle has landed. Still, a great game, a brilliant game from both players, I think, and it shows the character of both these fighting young players. I have to say, Magnus bouncing back after losing to Nakamura is really a hard feat. A lot of us would crumble Magnus, that's why he's world champion. But also, all credit goes to Wei Yi, who proved in that game, give him a bit more experience, he wants to beat everyone, including the world champion. Thank you for watching my analysis of round 2. Hopefully there's going to be some great more games for the future. Bye for now.